bill is really quite extraordinary. I dealt with sanctions as the lead person throughout the whole Clinton administration. I've never seen a sanctions bill this tough, and it will be watered down. But that's not the big issue. The big issue is it's showing for the first time in his second term, that the president is determined to get behind Senate and House efforts to bring Putin to heel.
Now, a new recording has emerged of President Trump describing conversations he says he had with President Xi of China and the Russian President Putin during a fundraiser in 2024. In the tape published by CNN, Donald Trump appears to say he threatened to bomb both China and Russia. Let's have a listen.
To Putin, I said, if you go in to Ukraine, we're going to bomb out of Moscow. I'm telling you, I have no choice. The public wants it. The public. So he goes like, I don't believe you. He said, no way, and I said, way. And then he goes like, I don't believe you, but the truth is he believed me 10%. And I told you this, he believed me 10%. Then I'm with President Xi of China, but I said the same thing to them. I said, if you go into Taiwan, I'm going to bomb it out of Beijing. He thought I was crazy. He said, Beijing? You're going to bomb Beijing? I said, I have no choice. I got to bomb them. We're going to bomb Beijing. And he didn't believe me either, except 10%. And 10% is all you need. In fact, 5% would have been okay too. And we never had a problem.
Well, although the recording isn't entirely clear at times, it's clear that what President Trump was saying is that he did threaten Putin that he would bomb Moscow if he went into Ukraine. Well, the Kremlin spokesperson, Dmitry Peskov, has declined to confirm whether the phone call which Trump spoke about actually took place, and it comes during a week in which the US president has reversed US policy on Russia and said that more arms will now be sent to Ukraine. This after it had been announced that further arms shipments were to be halted. Let's speak to Ambassador Stuart Eizenstat. He was Donald Trump's special advisor for Holocaust issues, previously also a US Deputy Secretary of the Treasury. He was also a US ambassador to the European Union. Good evening to you, Ambassador Eizenstat.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
Really good to have you with us. I mean, what do you make of this tape which has emerged with Donald Trump claiming that he'd threatened to bomb Moscow in order to try and deter President Putin?
Well, it's hard to know whether this actually is an accurate tape or not, but what is important is what seems to be a sea change almost overnight at the White House. For months and months and months, the president has refused to apply any pressure on Putin, even when he has had numerous telephone conversations which he himself said were unsatisfactory. That's now changed in several ways. First of all, he has announced just today that he's going to resume arms sales, particularly of defensive weapons, to Ukraine after holding them up for months. Second, a real signal came today from Senator John Thune, who is the majority leader of the Senate, and he agreed to move a bill which has a remarkable 85 Senate co-sponsors. That's almost every one of the 100 senators. Bipartisan, half Republican, half Democrat, and led by President Trump's closest advisor in the Senate, Senator Lindsey Graham. And it's the most extraordinary tariff bill I've dealt with penalties and sanctions bills. This is the most remarkable sanctions bill ever. It would impose 500% tariffs on any country whose companies do business with Russia on sanctioned goods. Now, I think that may be diluted, but the fact is that Thune would not have brought it up and said it was going to pass by the end of August had he not gotten a signal from the White House. And at the same time, the majority leader, Congressman Johnson, who just recently got the big, beautiful bill through for Trump, announced that he, too, had an interest in the bill. So this is a sea change, and hopefully it will send an important signal to Putin that he's not having an open door at the White House now, that there are real sanctions efforts
Lots to unpick there, Ambassador. First of all, just on the issue of that tape, and yes, clearly the quality is not too good. It's not clear, is it, when he made this threat to President Putin, who, of course, did go ahead and launch the invasion of Ukraine in 2022, by which time Joe Biden was in the White House.
No, but may I remind you that the timing you raised is very important, because in his first term, he was faced with a situation where in the Obama administration in 2014, Russia had already annexed part of Ukraine, that is in Crimea. And during his first term, what were called the Little Green Men, without identified Russian insignias, but clearly Russian troops, who are already starting to fight in the Donbass area where the fighting is going on now. So we don't know exactly the timing. But if you put that together with the fact, as I've mentioned, that a Senate bill is now going to be brought to the floor with a remarkable 85% of the Senate co-sponsoring, headed by Lindsey Graham, the closest senator to the president, and that the Congress on the House side, the Speaker indicates he'd be interested. That would not have happened unless they had gotten at least a yellow signal, if not a green one, from the president, because they had not been willing to put the bill up until they got such a signal from the White House. This is very important.
So do you think there is a real change now from President Trump? Because we've heard week after week him saying that he was getting frustrated, he was getting annoyed with President Putin. Putin, of course, has refused every effort to try to broker a proper ceasefire. We've had President Trump making those suggestions. It now seems that he overruled his own defense secretary to resume arms shipments to Ukraine. And as you say, we do now have these new moves to impose some really tough sanctions on Russia.
Yes. So, as you know, the president is very mercurial. His positions change from day to day. But I think that this is an accumulated, as you're suggesting, an accumulated frustration. Phone call after phone call after phone call. And Ukraine has accepted his conditions for a ceasefire, and Putin has not. And I think the president feels, and he's said so in so many words, that he's being played with by Putin. And Putin may have really overestimated his grip on the president. And so I think that this could be a genuine sea change. And again, not just let's forget the tape for a minute because we don't know when it occurred, but if you just look, as I've said, at the signal that's clearly being given by the Senate Majority Leader, Thune, and the House Speaker, it indicates that the White House clearly is giving them a signal that it's okay to go forward. Now, the bill is really quite extraordinary. I dealt with sanctions as a lead person throughout the whole Clinton administration. I've never seen a sanctions bill this tough, and it will be watered down. But that's not the big issue. The big issue is it's showing for the first time in his second term, that the president is determined to get behind Senate and House efforts to bring Putin to heel. That's really very important.
And what do you think has brought about this change of heart? Because many people have been questioning for months why President Trump simply expresses exasperation with President Putin, but has until this point at least appeared unwilling to stand up to him.
I think it's a combination of two things. You're quite right. He has gone week after week having unsatisfactory calls and saying so and not doing anything. And I think he just reached a boiling point at which he felt like Putin was really taking advantage of him. But second, he couldn't ignore the fact that 85 of 100 senators not just said they would vote, but actually co-sponsored legislation led by his closest advisor, Senator Lindsey Graham, the Republican senator of South Carolina. So I think the White House just concluded, look, this is a freight train, and if we're going to either be run over it by it, or we're going to join it and try to make it a little less obnoxious from the White House standpoint, given a presidential waiver, perhaps taking some of the tariff measures out. But I think it's a recognition of reality, plus the fact that I think he just reached a boiling point with Putin, and Putin has overplayed his hand.
Former US Ambassador to the European Union, Stuart Eizenstat. Really good to speak to you. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
My pleasure. Thank you.